In the early 13th century, a storm began to rise from the vast grasslands of Central Asia, a storm that would change the course of human history forever. It did not come with thunder or rain, but with hooves, the sound of 1,000 horses, rhythmic and relentless, echoing across the plains. Across the endless steppe, thousands of horsemen rode with unmatched speed and discipline. They were masters of the horse and the bow, a force the world had never seen. Within a few decades, they would build the largest land empire in human history, stretching from the Pacific to the heart of Europe. They were the Mongols. Fierce, resilient, and bound by a destiny that would be forged in the fires of conflict and survival. And their story is one of survival, strategy, and unstoppable conquest. A story that begins not with an empire, but with a single boy. Before he became one of history's most feared leaders, Genghis Khan was known as Temujin. He was born into a world where survival was a luxury. He was born into a harsh and unforgiving world. The Mongolian steppe, where the winters are brutal and the summers are fleeting. His father was poisoned by rivals, and his family was abandoned by their own tribe, left to starve in the wilderness. The betrayal was absolute. As a child, Temujin knew hunger, betrayal, and danger. But these struggles did not break him. They shaped the steel in his soul. He learned to survive in the shadows. He learned that in this world, trust was a weapon, and strength was the only currency that mattered. He learned to lead. Over time, he gathered loyal followers, those who saw in him the vision of a unified people. Alliances were forged in blood and honor. Temujin's rise was not a solitary path. He found a brother in Jamuka, a bond of Anda sealed in blood. Together, they dreamed of a united steppe. But as their power grew, so did the seeds of a rivalry that would one day tear their world apart. It was a clash of ideologies. The old tribal traditions versus a new vision of the future. When the Merkit tribe struck at night, kidnapping Temujin's young bride, Borte, he faced his darkest hour. In the brutal logic of the steppe, such a loss often meant the end of a leader's honor. But for Temujin, it was a call to arms that would test his every instinct. He did not despair. Instead, he organized a daring and precise rescue. With the help of Jamuka and the powerful Togrul Khan, he launched a lightning strike that shattered the Merkits. This victory proved his strategic brilliance and his unwavering loyalty to those he loved. Temujin knew that the old ways of the steppe were broken. He began to promote men not because of their noble birth or tribal bloodline, but because of their courage and skill on the battlefield. This revolutionary shift earned him the undying loyalty of the common warrior. One by one, the rival tribes fell. The Tatars, the Merkits, and finally the powerful Naimans. All were brought under Temujin's banner. Through a combination of calculated mercy and swift absolute justice, he began to forge a single Mongol identity. In 1206, on the sacred banks of the Onon River, the destiny of the world was sealed. The Grand Assembly, the Kurultai, saw the tribal leaders bow to one man. He was no longer just Temujin. He was Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. The proclamation of 1206 was the birth of a machine. The fragmented tribes were now a unified arrow, aimed at the heart of the sedentary world. Genghis Khan had turned a people of the wind into an unstoppable force of conquest. He established the Yasa, a code of law that brought order to the chaos of the steppe. Theft was punished, religious tolerance was practiced, and for the first time in history, the vast grasslands were safe for those who followed the Khan's law. But the steppe was not enough. Genghis Khan looked beyond the horizon, toward the wealthy empires that had long looked down upon the nomads. The hunt was about to begin on the global scale. From an abandoned child to the master of the steppe, Temujin had achieved the impossible. That the greatest challenges and the most epic conquests were still to come. The world was about to meet the Mongols. This concludes part 1 of our journey. Join us in part 2 as we explore the revolutionary warfare tactics and the massive expansion across Asia and Europe. The story of the Mongol Empire is only just beginning. With the tribes unified under the banner of Genghis Khan, the Mongols were no longer just a collection of nomads. They were the most efficient war machine the world had ever seen. Genghis Khan reorganized Mongol society into a strict decimal system. Units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000. This structure broke old tribal loyalties, creating an army that moved with a single, devastating purpose. Discipline under the Khan was absolute. In the decimal system, if one man in a unit of 10 fled, the entire 10 were executed. This ironclad rule forged a bond of survival and mutual accountability. No longer were they fighting for a clan's honor. They were fighting for the survival of their unit and the glory of the great Mongol state. This was the birth of a professional military, unparalleled in the medieval world. Every Mongol warrior was a master of the horse and the bow. They could ride for days, surviving on dried meat and mare's milk, and shoot with deadly accuracy while traveling at full speed. Their tactics were revolutionary. They mastered the art of the feigned retreat, luring overconfident enemies into deadly ambushes. They used speed, deception, and psychological warfare to shatter much larger armies. Communication was their secret weapon. The YAM system, a network of relay stations across the steppe, allowed messages to travel faster than ever before, giving the Khan absolute control over distant fronts. In 1211, the Mongols turned their eyes toward the wealthy Jin dynasty in northern China. The Great Wall, long a symbol of security, was about to be tested by a new kind of conqueror. The power of the Yam was symbolized by the paisa, a tablet of authority in gold, silver, or wood. It was the world's first diplomatic passport, granting the bearer the right to food, horses, and protection across the entire empire. To harm a messenger carrying the paisa was to invite the total wrath of the Khan. This system ensured that a command from Karakoram could reach the edges of the empire with a speed that defied the geography of the medieval world. They learned quickly. Captured engineers were forced to build massive siege engines. City after city fell as the Mongols adapted to warfare they had never seen before. By 1215, the great city of Beijing was theirs. Expansion continued westward. When the Khwarezmian Empire insulted the Khan by executing his envoys, the response was swift and absolute. Genghis Khan launched a massive invasion that would leave Central Asia forever changed. The siege of Zhengdu was a turning point. For months, the Mongols surrounded the Jin capital, learning the patient, brutal art of starvation and siege. They captured Chinese engineers, absorbing the secrets of gunpowder and heavy artillery. When the city finally fell in 1215, it wasn't just a military victory. It was a psychological blow that echoed across Asia. The nomads had proven they could conquer the most advanced fortifications on earth. Great cities like Samarkand and Bukhara were destroyed. The Mongols showed no mercy to those who resisted, using terror as a weapon to ensure future surrenders without a single arrow being fired. But the Mongol machine had a darker side. During sieges, they often used karash, captives forced to serve as human shields or to fill moats with earth. This psychological terror was designed to break the will of the defenders. They were masters of turning an enemy's own people against them, spreading rumors of their own brutality to ensure that the next city on the horizon would surrender before a single catapult was built. But to those who surrendered, they offered protection. Under the Khan's law, trade began to flourish again, and the first threads of a new, connected world were being woven across the ruins. Asia was falling, but the Mongol ambition knew no bounds. The banners were already turning further west, toward the snowy forests and night-filled plains of Europe. The destruction of Bukhara and Samarkand was not mere brutality. It was a calculated warning. Genghis Khan himself entered the great mosque of Bukhara, proclaiming himself the flail of God sent to punish the wicked. The sophisticated irrigation systems of Central Asia, which had sustained civilizations for centuries, were systematically destroyed, turning fertile lands back into the steppe the Mongols knew best. Despite the initial bloodbath, the Mongol conquests unified nearly the entire length of the Silk Road under a single administration for the first time in history. This period, known as the Pax Mongolica, allowed the safe passage of goods, ideas, and technologies across continents. Gunpowder, papermaking, and the compass moved west, while Persian medicine and astronomy flowed into China, laying the foundations for a new global era. The westward expansion eventually led to the first clash with the principalities of the Rus. At the Battle of the Kalka River in 1223, a Mongol scouting force under the brilliant generals Subutai and Jebe proved that the warriors of the West were no match for the discipline of the East. It was a terrifying preview of the storm that was about to break over the heart of Europe. The world was shrinking, and the Mongol shadow was growing longer by the day. After shattering the empires of the East, the Mongol machine turned its cold, calculating gaze toward the West. A storm was rising that would push the limits of the empire and change the history of Europe forever. Under the leadership of Batu Khan and the legendary general Subutai, the Mongols entered the lands of the Rus. The disorganized principalities, long engaged in internal rivalries, were unprepared for the speed and ferocity of the Tatars from the steppe. The invasion was not a rash decision. It was preceded by the greatest reconnaissance mission in history. The general, Subutai, led a force of 20,000 men on a 3-year, 5,000-mile raid that circled the Caspian Sea, testing the defenses of the West and gathering vital intelligence for the main assault. In 1240, the mother of cities, Kiev, fell after a brutal siege. The destruction was so absolute that travelers years later described a landscape of ruins and skulls. The gateway to Central Europe was now wide open, and the Mongol shadow lengthened across the continent. While European armies huddled in their castles for the winter, the Mongols used the cold as a weapon. They waited for the great rivers of Russia to freeze solid, turning them into highways that allowed their cavalry to bypass traditional fortifications and strike with terrifying speed where they were least expected. The Mongol strategy was a masterpiece of coordination. They split their forces into a lightning-fast, two-pronged invasion. While one army engaged the Polish and German forces to the north, the main force struck directly into the heart of the Kingdom of Hungary. At the Battle of Legnica in 1241, the flower of European chivalry, Polish knights, German miners, and the warrior monks of the Templars gathered to stop the invaders. They were brave, heavily armored, and trained for traditional, honorable combat. They had no idea they were about to face a nightmare. The Mongols used smoke and deception to blind the knights, drawing them into a panicked charge. From the haze, thousands of arrows fell with deadly precision. By the end of the day, the European army was annihilated, and 9 sacks of ears were sent back to Batu Khan as proof of the victory. Days later, the main Mongol force faced King Bela IV of Hungary at the Battle of Mohi. The Hungarians felt secure behind their wagon-lager camp, but Subutai launched a daring night river crossing, catching the European army in a colossal pincer movement. The Hungarian camp became a slaughterhouse. King Bela narrowly escaped, but his kingdom was laid waste. To the terrified survivors, it seemed as though the end of the world had arrived. The path to Vienna and the heart of the Holy Roman Empire was clear. But then, in December 1241, something unexpected happened. News reached the front that the great Khan, Urgedei, had died in the Mongol heartland. According to the law of the Yasa, all princes of the blood were required to return to Mongolia to elect a new successor. The pursuit of King Bela IV was relentless. A Mongol detachment chased him across his entire kingdom, all the way to the coast of the Adriatic Sea. It was a demonstration of their single-mindedness. No target was too small, and no enemy king would be allowed to regroup. The hunt only ended when the king escaped to a small island, with the Mongols watching from the shore. Just as they were preparing to push into the Adriatic and toward the gates of Rome, the Mongols vanished as quickly as they had arrived. Europe had been saved by a heartbeat, and by the internal politics of a distant capital. The storm had passed, but its memory would haunt the continent for centuries. The withdrawal was not a surrender. In the wake of the invasion, Batu Khan established the Golden Horde, a powerful khanate that would rule over Russia and the Western steppe for nearly 300 years, forever shifting the cultural and political axis of the East. The withdrawal left Europe in a state of shock and fear. They had faced an enemy they could not understand, a force that seemed to defy the rules of nature and war. This terror spurred the first major diplomatic missions from the West to the East, as popes and kings sent envoys on the long journey to the Mongol court, desperate to understand the power that had almost consumed them. The era of conquest was transitioning into an era of connection. Join us in Part 4 as we explore the Mongol Empire at its absolute peak, the Pax Mongolica, where the world's cultures were woven together under the protection of the great Khan. The era of blood and conquest gave way to something the world had never seen, a century of relative peace across the heart of Eurasia. This was the Pax Mongolica, a time when the Mongol shadow brought order, security, and connection to a fragmented world. Under the protection of the Great Khan, the Silk Road flourished. It was said that a young maiden carrying a gold plate could travel from the Pacific to the Mediterranean without fear of robbery. This security allowed trade to reach unprecedented levels, weaving the economies of East and West together. The empire became a highway for ideas. Under Mongol rule, cultures that had been isolated for millennia began to share knowledge. Persian medicine, Chinese mathematics, and Greek astronomy flowed freely along the trade routes, sparking a global intellectual revolution. Technologies that would define the modern world, paper, printing, the compass, and gunpowder, spread rapidly during this time. The Mongols were not just masters of war. They were the unintended catalysts for the spread of innovations that would eventually end the Middle Ages. At the peak of this golden age was Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis. In his magnificent capital of Dadu, he established the Yuan dynasty, ruling over a China more connected to the world than ever before. It was a court of such splendor that travelers like Marco Polo were left speechless. Among the many who traveled the safe roads of the empire was Marco Polo. His accounts of the splendor of the East, from the use of coal to the staggering wealth of the Khan's cities, would captivate Europe for generations. Polo's journey was a testament to the unprecedented access the Mongol peace provided, bridging two worlds that had long been strangers. But the empire's very size was its undoing. After the death of the great Khan monk, central authority began to dissolve. The vast territories split into 4 independent khanates, each ruling their region with Mongol law, but increasingly influenced by the local cultures they had conquered. To facilitate this massive trade, the Mongols introduced the first wide-scale use of paper currency. Backed by the absolute power of the state, these Chow banknotes replaced heavy bags of gold and silver, creating a more fluid and modern economy. It was a financial revolution that would take centuries for the rest of the world to fully adopt. The machine of unity began to grind to a halt. Internal conflicts, succession disputes, and civil wars between brothers weakened the bonds of the empire. The Mongols, who had once been a single, focused arrow, were now a house divided against itself. Then came an enemy no strategy could defeat. The Black Death, travelling along the very trade routes the Mongols had made safe, decimated populations and crippled the economies that sustained Mongol power. The connectivity they had created became the path for their own decline. Gradually, the Mongol grip on the sedentary world loosened. In China, the Ming dynasty rose to expel the Yuan. In Persia and Russia, the Khanates slowly fragmented, or were absorbed by rising new powers. The great machine had finally run its course. Yet, the Mongol legacy remains etched in the foundation of our world. They redefined the borders of nations, established the first global trade networks, and showed how mobility and communication could transform history. Their story is more than just one of conquest. It is the story of how the world became one. Perhaps most surprising was the Mongol policy of religious tolerance. In an age of holy wars, the Khans protected all faiths, exempting religious leaders from taxes and inviting scholars of all beliefs to debate in their courts. They understood that a diverse empire was a stable empire, creating a unique sanctuary for the world's religions. From an abandoned child on the steppe to the rulers of the largest land empire in history, the Mongols rose from the harshest beginnings to change the world forever. Their hoofbeats may have faded, but the world they forged still remains. This concludes our journey through the Mongol Empire.